The final, part 2 of the Kingmaker, is now beginning. The Kingmaker's rule is absolute. His clients are thriving. His wealth is immense. His anonymity was his shield, but the shield is cracking. A desperate actress is signing a contract with a ghost. A powerful senator is hunting a myth. And the one woman who saw through him from the start is walking into a building made of his oldest failure. The game is about to change. Subscribe to Novella Station now, and you don't miss the explosive second half. Chapter 11. The Unseen Detonation. The post-production of the run was a clinic in tension. The edit was a nerve-wracking 98 minutes. The score was the hum of the van's engine, the patter of rain, the silent scream of a breaking heart. The publicity strategy, the ghost in the machine. Alex and Maya crafted a campaign that mirrored the film's central mystery, the unseen wife. There were no traditional trailers featuring Eleanor Shaw. Instead, her presence was a ghost in the marketing. Phase 1, a single, stark poster. It showed the back of a woman, a stand-in a simple kitchen, bathed in morning light from a window, her face unseen. Text. She asked him to be careful. She was the reason he needed to be. No title. No names. Phase 2. An audio teaser released on narrative podcast platforms. It was the film's intimate, devastating radio exchange between Mike and Sarah during the heist. Just their voices, layered over the sound of the moving van and rain. It went viral for its emotional rawness. Phase 3. The title reveal and trailer focused solely on Mike's, Croft's, perspective, the routine, the mounting paranoia, the violence. The wife remained an audible, unseen presence. The tagline, "Trust is the ultimate vulnerability." The premiere, an unveiling. The premiere was a subdued, industry-heavy affair at a boutique theater. The real spectacle was the post-screening Q&A. For the first time, the public saw Eleanor Shaw. She sat beside Julian Croft and Maya Thorne, a woman of profound, quiet grace. The moderator asked about the challenge of playing a pivotal role while being physically hidden. Eleanor Shaw's voice, that legendary instrument, filled the room. The challenge wasn't in the hiding. It was in building a complete human being, a history, a love, a terrible calculation, using only the tools a wife would use in her own home. Her voice from another room, the slope of her shoulders as she does the dishes, the weight of her body in the bed beside him. Sarah isn't a villain. She's a tragedy that decided to become a weapon. The answer drew a stunned, respectful silence. It reframed the entire film. The sole major interview was with a Hollywood reporter. The journalist, known for piercing questions, sat with Julian, Eleanor, and Maya. The discussion was deep, focusing on the film's emotional mechanics. Towards the end, the journalist asked Julian a lighter, curveball question. After this grueling physical and emotional transformation, what's the one recurring expense in your life these days that still feels shockingly high? Julian, relaxed and riding the wave of artistic validation, chuckled. He leaned into the microphone, a wry smile on his face. Honestly, my manager, the mysterious Mr. White. Guy costs a fortune. But, he shrugged, the smile turning genuine. I guess you get what you pay for. The room chuckled. It was a throwaway line, a star joking about his expensive team. But the name, Mr. White, landed in the transcript. It was casual. It was specific. It was a color. The reaction, the fuse is lit. The film itself was a critical and commercial triumph for its budget. Reviews hailed Croft's career-redefining performance, Shaw's devastating vocal and physical cameo, and Thorne's bone-deep directorial control. But in certain circles, the same circles that had heard whispers about Greg Williams's Mr. Blue, Dorothy Duran's Mr. Red, and Richard Wong's Mr. Gray, the throwaway line in the interview was a thunderclap. The legend, carefully contained for years, had a new, volatile piece of evidence. It was no longer just whispered about by desperate CEOs and restaurateurs. It was joked about by a movie star on the cover of The Hollywood Reporter. The film's success secured Julian Croft's new career. Eleanor Shaw was hailed as a master. Maya Thorne was anointed a major new director. And in his loft, Alex watched the interview clip. He saw the moment, the casual, comfortable drop of Mr. White. He didn't react with anger. He analyzed it. The secrecy was eroding, not from a breach, but from success itself. The legend was becoming a story too good not to tell. A new message arrived, not from a potential client. This one was from Arthur Fisk of the law firm. It contained a single, forwarded email inquiry. The subject line, urgent, seeking an introduction to the Kingmaker. The sender's name was one that made even Alex pause. It was the personal office of Senator Andrew Roth, chairman of a powerful finance committee, and a man whose presidential ambitions were the worst-kept secret in Washington. The fuse was lit, and the spark was now racing toward powder kegs far larger than restaurants or movie stars. The Kingmaker closed the dossier on Julian Croft. The next client wasn't seeking a crown for a company or a career. He was seeking one for a nation. Alex stared at the name on the screen, Senator Andrew Roth. It wasn't an opportunity. It was a bear trap wrapped in an invitation. The Roths didn't hire consultants. They acquired assets. They didn't pay for success. They demanded fealty. Their games were played with the currency of secrets, compromise, and institutional violence. To be their kingmaker wouldn't mean building a throne. It would mean becoming the architect of a prison, with himself inside the first cell. His rules flashed in his mind, clear and immutable. No entanglement, anonymity, control. This was the antithesis of all three. He didn't draft a refusal. Refusal was a response, and a response was an engagement. He simply began erasing the point of contact. He sent a single, coded instruction to Arthur Fisk: sever all inquiry pipelines. Initiate Protocol Echo. Protocol Echo was a pre-designed dissolution sequence. The KM Holdings LLC that managed the film investment would be dissolved into a cascade of smaller, dormant trusts in jurisdictions with formidable privacy walls. The digital footprints linking his various color identities to a central core began a slow, automated rewrite, scattering like mercury. He knew it wouldn't make him a ghost to someone like Roth. Money, especially the kind he now moved, always left a thermodynamic signature, a heat trace in the global financial system. You couldn't hide the energy, only misdirect it. The goal wasn't to vanish from Roth's radar, but to become a blurry, inconvenient, and ultimately dangerous blip on its edge. He packed a single bag. The loft, always sterile, held nothing personal. The heavy metal cards, the tablets, the encrypted servers, they were tools, not treasures. They could be replaced. His mind and his compiled compendiums, the digitized wisdom of every success, every failure, every human pattern, were his only true assets. They were stored in a way not even Fisk could fully access, scattered across 100 anonymous clouds, waiting for a key only he possessed. As he prepared to walk out the door for the last time, his gaze fell on a news feed still flickering on a secondary screen. A headline about Roth's probable presidential run. Alex's expression was flat, devoid of fear. It held the cold calculation of a strategist assessing a rival kingdom's fortifications. He understood power. The Roths believed power was taken, held, and defended through domination. Alex Maxim had learned a deeper truth. True power was gravitational. It was the silent, irresistible pull that made others orbit your will. He had spent years building that gravity for clients. He had never turned its full force as a weapon. But the knowledge was there in the compendiums, the structural weaknesses of empires, the leverage points of men who believed themselves untouchable, the precise pressure required to make a dynasty collapse from within. He didn't plan to use it, but as he switched off the lights, leaving the loft to its empty silence, the unspoken thought hung in the dark air, a final contingency. A kingmaker holds the power to crown, and the same hand that places the crown can just as easily snatch it back and melt it down in the very fire he built to forge it. He didn't vanish. He simply subtracted himself from the equation Roth was trying to solve, becoming a variable no longer available for manipulation. The next city awaited. Another broken king, perhaps less notorious, undoubtedly less dangerous, would be waiting. The game went on. But Alex Maxim had just declined to play on a board where the only winning move was to become slave. He was a sovereign entity, and he would crown himself with the only crown that mattered, his freedom. Before closing the final lid on his laptop, Alex executed the last social protocol. He composed 3 identical, encrypted messages, sending them to Dorothy Duran, Richard Wong, and Julian Croft through their respective secure channels. Subject: Operational Pivot. From: Redacted. Protocol: Dusk. Effective immediately. This point of contact is terminated and will be digitally scoured. Do not attempt reuse. For emergency communication only, use the following conduit: K1ngmkr@segaint.org. Messages will be checked at irregular intervals. Assume a 72-hour minimum response delay. Do not send attachments. Do not reference real names, locations, or specific project titles. Use client color codes and agreed-upon ciphers. The work continues. Maintain your trajectories. K. He didn't sign off with a color. They would know who it was from. The segaint.org address was a dark web anonymizing service, a ghost in the machine's machine. It was untraceable to him, a dead drop in the digital void. The burner phone he'd used, the one that had connected him to Mr. Blue, Mr. Red, Mr. Gray, and Mr. White, had never been in his real name. It was purchased with cash, activated under a false identity generated by one of Fisk's more discreet associates. It was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost number. He removed the SIM card, snapped it in half, and dropped the pieces in a separate public bins on his walk to the train station. The phone itself went into a third. He carried no device that could be linked to Alex Maxim. A new, clean laptop awaited in a locker in another city, paid for with cryptocurrency from an untraceable wallet. His travel was booked under another layered alias, using a circuitous route of ground transportation designed to avoid facial recognition hubs. He wasn't fleeing. He was executing a pre-planned, strategic decoupling. The legend of the Kingmaker had grown too loud, attracting predators instead of petitioners. He was not prey. He was a force of nature, and a force of nature, when confronted by a wall, does not break against it. It flows around. It goes underground. It waits. The Roths wanted a weapon. They would find only the echo of where one had been and the faint, lingering scent of ozone. The kind left in the air after a lightning strike has vanished back into the sky. The corrected version, with proper continuity and roles. The champagne in Marissa Vance's penthouse tasted like ash. On the silent, vast screen of her television, Julian Croft's face was paused mid-interview. That wry, knowing smile. The caption below read, "A career reforged." His throwaway line was on a loop in her mind. My manager, the mysterious Mr. White. Guy costs a fortune. Mr. White, a shard of a larger puzzle she'd been trying to solve for months. Whispers passed between agents over cocktails and financiers in green rooms, of colors and miracles. Greg Williams and his restaurants, saved by Mr. Blue. The Duran widow holding her empire, rumors of a Mr. Red in the shadows. Richard Wong's shocking pivot, with a Mr. Gray credited in the tightest circles. And now, Julian, Mr. White. It wasn't a person. It was a service. A ghost in the machine of failing careers. And it was her only way out of the gilded cage of her own fading relevance. She picked up a burner phone and dialed a number she'd extracted from a deeply indebted studio executive. A man answered, his voice old and tired, like pages in a forgotten law library. Holden. Mr. Holden. Marissa Vance. I need an introduction. To whom? To the color wheel, she said, her voice taut. To Mr. White. Or Blue. Or Gray. I'm not particular about the hue. I'm particular about results. There was a long, stagnant silence. I don't know what you're talking about, Ms. Vance. Don't insult me, she snapped, the polished actress vanishing, leaving only raw need. Williams, Duran, Wong, Croft, for miracles in 3 years, each with a ghost attached. I'm not asking for state secrets. I'm asking for a referral. My career is the assignment. Name the price. I'll pay it. Another silence, heavier this time. She could hear the faint wheeze of his breath, the creak of a leather chair. The individuals you were speculating about, Holden said slowly, are not available. That particular consultancy model is, as of very recently, inactive, dissolved. Her heart plummeted, then a spike of furious understanding. Because of Julian, because he said the name. So the ghost got spooked. She leaned forward, as if Holden were in the room. I'm not a threat. I'm a client. A quiet, paying, discreet client. My crisis isn't headlines. It's a slow, quiet death by polish. Perfect for a ghost. Holden sighed, a sound of profound weariness. Ms. Vance, even if such a service existed, you must understand, the fee is not merely financial. It is constitutional. It requires a surrender you're likely not prepared to make. Try me. A final pause. I will make some discreet inquiries to see if there is anyone whose methodology matches your description and who might be willing to consider a new assignment. I can promise nothing. Do not call this number again. If there is a path, you will be contacted. The terms, should they be offered, will be non-negotiable. The line went dead. Marissa set the phone down, her hand steady now. A grim smile touched her lips. He hadn't said no. He'd said inquire. She walked to the window, looking down at the city that had forgotten how to want her. They thought she was just beautiful and brittle. They'd forgotten the sheer, ruthless will that had gotten her here in the first place. She would pay the price. She would surrender whatever they asked. She would become their perfect, obedient project. Because Marissa Vance didn't just want to come back. She wanted a crown. And she just heard the faintest echo of the man who could forge one. Time for a short promo. Our stories ask, what's the true cost of a second chance? And what if the bill comes from your most haunting ghost? If you're here for complex, costly resurrections, subscribe to Novella Station. Chapter 12. Home. Back in a warm embrace. The city skyline shrank in the train window, its jagged peaks of ambition softening into the blurred greens and browns of the countryside. For the first time in years, Alex Maxim was not moving toward a client, a crisis, or a strategic retreat. He was moving toward a point of origin. He hadn't seen his parents' house in Connecticut since before the Veverance sale. Phone calls were regular, brief updates. I'm well, business is good. That functioned more like system pings than conversation. Vacations were planned and then canceled, replaced by the relentless pull of a crumbling empire that needed its architect. The house appeared at the end of a tree-lined drive, unchanged. A sturdy colonial with a wraparound porch, his father's retired army flag hanging by the door, his mother's hydrangeas a defiant burst of blue against the white clapboard. It was a monument to stability, a world away from the convertible lofts and financial district spires he inhabited. He knocked, feeling strangely like a visitor. The door swung open. His mother, Clara, stood there, her hands covered in flour. She didn't gasp or cry. Her eyes, the same sharp gray as his own, just softened with a deep, quiet relief. "Alex," she said, as if he'd just come home from school. "You're early. I'm making pie." Behind her, his father, Robert Maxim, emerged from the study. He stood straighter than any CEO Alex had ever advised, his posture a permanent testament to discipline. He gave a single, slow nod. "Son." The warmth that hit Alex wasn't a feeling he could strategize. It was a physical thing, baked into the smell of pie crust and old books and lemon polish. It hollowed him out and filled him up simultaneously. "Hi, Mom." "Dad." He was ushered into the kitchen, the command center of the house. His younger sister, Lily, bounded down the stairs. At 22, just graduated with a degree in archival science, she was all bright energy and curious eyes. "Look what the cat dragged in," she announced, throwing her arms around him in a hug he hadn't realized he needed. "I thought you'd been absorbed by a corporate merger and were just a voice on speakerphone now." "Tried that," Alex said, the ghost of a real smile touching his lips. "The merger was hostile. I had to extract. Over apple pie and strong coffee, they talked. Not about portfolios or profit margins." His father asked about the logistics of his work, a deliberately vague term they'd settled on years ago. Alex gave equally vague, truthful answers about streamlining operations and managing turnarounds. His mother watched his hands, the way they stayed still around his fork, No nervous energy, just a profound, banked stillness that hadn't been there when he was a feverish, dream-chasing boy. "You look tired, Alex." "I am," he admitted, and the simple truth of it, spoken in this safe room, felt like a confession. Lily, perceptive in a way only a sibling could be, leaned forward. "Is it worth it? All the invisible work?" He met her gaze. She was asking the question he never allowed himself. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "I'm good at it. It needs doing. But the cost of the work is becoming part of the work itself." His father grunted, a sound of understanding. "In the service, we called that getting target locked. You see the mission, not the landscape. Sometimes you need to fall back to see the field." Alex nodded. That's what this was. A tactical retreat to a secure base. To remember what a foundation felt like, that wasn't transactional. For 3 days, he did nothing of consequence. He helped his dad fix a loose shutter. He sorted through boxes in the attic with Lily, unearthing relics of his own past, debate trophies, blueprints for ridiculous childhood inventions. He sat on the porch with his mother in comfortable silence, watching the dusk settle. No one mentioned Kingmakers. No one needed a color. He was just Alex, the son, the brother, a man visiting home. On the morning of the 4th day, as he packed his small bag, his father clasped his shoulder at the door. "You built your own army, son. Remember, even generals need to know what they're fighting for, not just what they're fighting against." His mother pressed a container of pie into his hands. "For the road. Don't live on takeout." Lily slipped a piece of paper into his coat pocket. On it, she'd written an email address. "Not the one you use for work," she whispered. "The one you had in high school. Remember it? I still use mine. Write sometime. Tell me what the landscape looks like." He got in the rental car, the container of pie on the passenger seat. He didn't look back at the house in the rear view. He carried the image of it, solid and warm, with him as he pointed the car north, toward the stark, clarifying solitude of the mountains. He had gone home to remember his name. Now he needed to decide what Alex Maxim, the Kingmaker, would do next. The world of trembling empires still turned. But for the first time, he felt the weight of the crown he placed on others, and wondered if a foundation, once poured, could ever be poured for himself. The simplicity of the scene worked perfectly. Let's tighten it with that family dynamic in mind. The loving ignorance, the quiet concern, and Lily's sharp, sisterly curiosity. For 3 days, he did nothing of consequence. He helped his dad fix a loose shutter. He sorted through boxes in the attic with Lily, unearthing relics of his own past, debate trophies, blueprints for ridiculous childhood inventions that had never left the page. He sat on the porch with his mother in comfortable silence, watching the dusk settle. Over dinner on the second night, Lily finally pounced, her curiosity overcoming her tact. "Okay, seriously, business consulting is what you tell the IRS. What do you actually do? You vanish for years and then show up looking like you run a secret branch of the CIA." Their parents fell silent, politely curious but unwilling to pry. They knew only that after the storm of his early failures, he'd found his footing. The checks that sometimes arrived for birthdays and holidays were generous, but they cared more that the frantic, hollow look in his eyes had been replaced by this calm, this steady intensity. Alex took a sip of water. "I help people who are where I was," he said, his voice even, staring at something they built that's falling apart. "I see the cracks they can't. I give them a plan. Like a life coach." Lily pressed, not buying it. "Like a strategist. For a commission." "What kind of commission?" "A significant one." His father nodded, a man who understood value for service. "As long as it's honest work, son." "It is." It wasn't a lie. The contract from Fisk, Holden and Green were models of legal honesty. The morality of the kingdoms he built was not his department. His mother reached over and patted his hand. "And it makes you happy? This fixing." Alex looked at her hand on his, felt the simple, unconditional concern. Happiness was a variable he'd removed from his equations years ago. Satisfaction, sometimes. Victory, often. But happiness? "It makes me effective, Mom. That's enough." Later, as he packed, Lily cornered him in the hallway. "You're not just a consultant," she whispered. "You help people realize their dreams for a commission. That's what you said last year." It's a weird, fairy godfather way to put it. Whose dreams? And what's the real cost? He looked at her, this brilliant sister who saw patterns in historical archives. She would see the pattern of his clients if she looked. He couldn't have that. The cost is a percentage of a dream, he said finally, his voice leaving no room for further chase. And some dreams are heavier than others. Don't worry about it, Lily. Worry about your archives. He slipped the piece of paper with her old email into his pocket, a tether to a world before colors and crowns. Driving away, the pie on the seat, the ghost of his mother's question lingered. Does it make you happy? He had no answer. But for the first time, in the quiet car, he acknowledged the question itself. The Kingmaker had spent so long answering everyone else's questions, he'd forgotten he was allowed to have any of his own. The next morning, over coffee that tasted of home, Lily looked at him with a spark of triumph in her eyes. "You're not the only one with news," she announced, unable to contain herself. "I got a job." "That was fast," Alex said, genuinely impressed. The archival science field wasn't known for its swift hires. "I know, right? But there's a catch." She leaned forward, a playful, sisterly extortion in her smile. "I'll tell you where, if you buy me a new dress. A proper first day at the big leagues dress. You can put on your corporate card, Mr. Significant Commission." He raised an eyebrow. "The big leagues. The biggest. At least in this state." She paused for dramatic effect. "Stratagem. Claire's firm. They're expanding their corporate archives and data management division. They like my thesis on institutional memory." The name landed in the cozy kitchen. Stratagem. Claire. Alex's mind didn't flinch. It cataloged. Threat assessment. Low. Emotional resonance. Null. Operational complication. High. His sister, a bright and curious variable, was entering a system he had once architected and which had then expelled him. She was a potential point of connection, a thread that could, if pulled, lead back to him. Not through Claire's cleverness, but through Lily's innocent chatter. He recovered not from emotion, but from the calculation, his expression shifting to one of mild, professional interest. Stratagem. A competent firm. Congratulations, Lily. That's an excellent first step. Their mother beamed. "Claire, your old friend. She's done so well." "Efficiently," Alex corrected gently, his tone neutral. "She executes a model very well." Lily caught the precision of the word. Efficiently, not wonderfully, and the total lack of warmth. The puzzle pieces shifted again. In the car to the boutique, the easy silence was replaced by a different kind of quiet, the quiet of a briefing. "Lily," Alex began, his eyes on the road, his voice low and utterly clear. "A rule for your new role. Do not mention my name there. Not to anyone. Not in passing. Not as an anecdote." She turned to him, confused. "Why? Would it help? I thought you knew her." "It would not help," he stated. "Claire and I had a professional divergence. My involvement in Stratagem's origin story is a discarded footnote in their current corporate narrative. Mentioning it would not curry favor. It would mark you as associated with a rejected prototype. It would introduce a personal variable into your professional environment. You want to be judged on your thesis, not on your brother's obsolete blueprints." He glanced at her, making sure the lesson landed. "Claire is not the girl I brought home for dinner. She's a CEO. The person who gets the job and the person who runs the company are different entities." "Business," he said, echoing the old, cold lesson he'd learned in her office, "does not allow personal emotions. It only allows results. You are there to provide a result, efficient archival management. Anything else is noise. Protect your position by maintaining total professional opacity." He wasn't warning her about Claire being evil. He was warning her that Claire was irrelevant to who Lily was, and that letting the past define her entry would be a strategic flaw. The dread wasn't for Claire's power, but for the potential of Lily's misstep. He was teaching her, in his way, how to survive in a kingdom, by becoming a ghost, just like him. Perfect. This is a brilliant, ruthless, and perfectly Alex response. It turns her desperation into a punitive contract, a lesson cloaked in business terms. "Let's integrate it." While Lily deliberated between a charcoal sheath dress and an emerald wrap, Alex stepped outside the boutique. The cool air was a systems check against the cloying warmth inside. He pulled out his encrypted device. A single new message, forwarded through Holden. From Marissa Vance. The tone was not of a star, but of a speculator who'd identified an undervalued asset. I understand you work in colors. I require one. The cost is irrelevant. Name it. Alex's expression didn't change. Marissa, the ghost who had assessed him as a liability and cut her losses. Now she saw the asset's appreciated value and wanted a piece. She wanted to hire the deficit. His mind processed it not as an emotional plea, but as a flawed merger proposal. The initial transaction, his unpaid, emotional investment in her early career, had resulted in her massive profit, her stardom, and his total loss. The ledger was catastrophically unbalanced. He typed a reply for Holden to forward, his fingers moving with cold precision. Inquiry noted. Actionable under non-standard terms. Subject owes a debt from a prior, unlicensed engagement. Terms for new contract as follows. 70% of gross earnings for 36 months. 30% constitutes standard fee for service. An additional 30% is applied to balance the historical ledger. A final 10% is levied as accrued interest on the unsettled debt. Services will be rendered remotely via secured video protocol. A representative, to be known as Mr. Black, will facilitate logistics upon formal acceptance. These terms are non-negotiable and represent the sole path to engagement. He sent it. The math was the message. 70%. It wasn't a fee. It was a forfeit. It was a punitive tariff on her audacity. The remote delivery ensured no personal contact, no chance for the old dynamic. Mr. Black was a shadow of a shadow. It was a contract designed to be refused, or, if accepted, it would turn her into an indentured engine, working primarily for him for 3 years. He would own her comeback. It was the ultimate rebalancing. He put the device away and looked through the window at Lily, holding up the emerald dress. The past was a ledger demanding settlement. The present was a trap set by a senator. The future was his sister, unknowingly walking into a building constructed from his first bankruptcy. He would buy Lily the dress, and with the same detached precision, he would begin to execute a new stratagem. If Claire's empire was the castle, he would not storm it. He would acquire its debt, one anonymous bond at a time. He would become the silent, majority shareholder in her victory. The ghost wanted to hire the Kingmaker. He would see if they could afford the price of resurrecting their own gravedigger. Alex slid the phone back into his pocket, the cool glass of the boutique window separating him from the warm, uncertain future inside. The reply to Marissa was sent. It was a door, but one made of thorns and fiscal barbed wire. He was curious, in a clinical way, to see if she'd try to open it. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly. Lily stood before a three-way mirror, the emerald-wrapped dress catching the light. It was perfect. It spoke of competence with a hint of daring, exactly what stratagem's sleek, aggressive culture would respect and slightly fear. The emerald, he said, his voice cutting through her hesitation. It's not a question. It's the correct choice. She turned, relief washing over her face, followed by that sharp curiosity again. You're sure? I'm sure. It establishes a presence without begging for one. It says you belong in the room, but you're also watching the room. He gestured to the sales associate. We'll take this one. As the dress was wrapped, Lily moved closer, her voice dropping. The way you talked about Claire and stratagem, it wasn't just professional divergence. It was more final. Alex met her gaze in the mirror. In business, Lily, there's only final. Divergence isn't a fork in the road. It's the creation of two separate roads. You are walking down hers. That's your choice, and it's a good one. But remember, you are building your own road. Don't look back for landmarks for mine. They won't be there. He paid with a black card that bore no name, only a string of numbers. On the drive back, the silence was pensive. Will I see you before I start? Lily asked, staring out the window. Unlikely. I have legacy issues to manage. But you have my emergency contact. Use it only for emergencies, not for office gossip. He paused. And Lily, excel. But excel quietly. The most powerful person in any room is often the one everyone forgets is taking notes. He dropped her off at their parents' house, refusing to come in for goodbye coffee. Prolonged departures were vulnerabilities. "The dress is perfect," she said, hugging him quickly at the curb. "Thank you. It's an investment," he said, but gave her shoulder a slight, uncharacteristic squeeze. "In your road." He drove away, not back to the city, but north. The quiet mountains were his next base of operations. In the passenger seat, the encrypted device chimed once. A new message, routed through Holden. It was a reply from Marissa Vance. It contained only 3 words. "Send the contract." Alex's lips thinned into a blade of a smile. The ghost had chosen indentured servitude. So be it. Mr. Black would be born tonight, a digital phantom to manage a star's captivity. And as the city vanished behind him, another process, initiated days ago, finalized. A confirmation alert flashed on his dashboard screen, a notification from an offshore trading platform. The transaction was complete. He now indirectly held a controlling, if thoroughly hidden, interest in a private equity fund that was Stratagem's largest creditor. He hadn't just bought Lily a dress for her first day. He just bought, brick by invisible brick, the foundation of the building she would walk into. The Kingmaker was no longer just fixing broken kingdoms. He was quietly acquiring the deeds to them. The morning of his departure, Alex found his mother alone in the kitchen, her hands deep in sudsy water, scraping a pot that was already clean. It was her tell, the way she worked out worry. "Mom." She turned, drying her hands on her apron, forcing a bright smile. "All set, sweetheart. I packed you some sandwiches for the road. Turkey. No mustard, you never liked it." "Thanks, Mom." He didn't move toward the door. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a simple, matte black rectangle on the speckled countertop. It looked alien amidst the canisters of flour and sugar. She blinked at it. "What's this?" "A new phone. It's for you," Alex said, his voice carefully neutral. "For the house. For anything." Picking it up, she turned it over. No numbers, no stripe, no logo. Just black plastic. "I don't understand. Is it a gift card? For the home store?" "Alex, that's sweet, but you shouldn't have. It has $10 million on it." The words fell into the sunny kitchen like a dropped anvil. The dish towel slipped from Clara Maxim's fingers. She stared at the card, then at her son, her face draining of color. "What?" "10 million. The access code is your birthday, backwards. It's from a private bank. Completely secure. 10 million. The whisper was sharp with panic. Her hands came up, not to take the card, but to push it away, as if it were radioactive. "Alex, no. Absolutely not. Where did you get that kind of money? What have you done?" This was the reaction he'd anticipated. The fear, not the gratitude. "It's clean, Mom. It's from my business. Consulting. I told you, it's been successful." "Successful?" Her voice climbed, laced with a lifetime of caution. "Successful people buy their mothers a new car, Alex. They don't hand over king's ransoms on a piece of plastic. This is drug money. Or you're in trouble. Are you in trouble? Is someone after you? Is that why you're leaving so suddenly?" "Mom, don't mom me." She was trembling now, her eyes wide with a fear far greater than any want. "You vanished for years. You come home so quiet and so hard. And now this? This is blood money. It has to be. No one earns $10 million helping people with their dreams." She threw the last word back at him, the one he'd given Lily, now sounding naive and grotesque. He didn't flinch. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the counter, meeting her terrified gaze with an immovable calm. "It is not blood money. It is the product of strategy, leverage, and contract law. I rebuild failing companies. The fees are substantial. This," he nodded at the card, "is a fraction. A small fraction. It is safer in your kitchen than in any bank. And I need to know that you and Dad are beyond reach. That if anything ever did happen, no one could ever touch you through a utility bill or a medical expense. This is your insulation. Your fortress." Her breath came in short, shaky bursts. "A fortress? Alex, this is a target. What if I lose it? What if someone steals it? What on earth would I even do with it? We don't need a fortress." "You don't need it until you do," he said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. And by then, it's two practical women who clipped coupons, terrified of this monstrous security, and the mother who heard the unspoken terror in her son's voice, the fear he was trying to preemptively quell. Slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds, she picked the card back up. Her tears weren't of joy, but of profound, bewildered sorrow. "My sweet, brilliant boy," she choked out. "What world did you have to walk into to make something like this? What did it cost you?" He had no answer for that. He just reached out and covered her hand, the one clutching the card, with his own. The cost is irrelevant. The result is what matters. This is a result. For you. Let that be enough. He kissed her cheek, tasting salt. He left her there, standing in the shaft of morning light, clutching a black card that felt less like a gift and more like a confession. A receipt for a life lived in shadows so deep they generated fortunes. In the driveway, his father's sharp eyes missed nothing. He'd seen his wife's pale face through the window. "You upset your mother," Robert stated, his voice a gravelly accusation. "I gave her security," Alex replied, meeting the old soldier's gaze. "She'll understand in time." Robert searched his son's face, looking for signs of the enemy: deceit, corruption, weakness. He saw only the impenetrable wall Alex had become. With a grim, reluctant nod, he accepted a truth. His son was fighting a war he couldn't comprehend on a map he couldn't see. The black card was ammunition for the home front. "To see that you come back in one piece," Robert said finally, the closest to a blessing he could give. Alex drove away. The $10 million was now his mother's secret burden and her ultimate shield. He had transferred a piece of his own cold armor onto the warm hearth of home. It was the most vulnerable and the most ruthless thing he could think to do. A quick pause. At Novella's station, our most powerful moments aren't explosions. They're the silent weight of a guilty conscience and a shocking grace of atonement. Love? Layer drama? Subscribe. Chapter 13, Mr. Black. Alex's tour of the world was a study in strategic absence. He moved through cities not as a tourist, but as a ghost auditing potential future battlefields. Zurich for its vaults, Singapore for its juridical opacity, Reykjavik for its serene, geothermal isolation. He worked from secure, temporary rooms, his presence a series of encrypted packets bouncing off satellites. His primary focus was the new, punitive asset, Marissa Vance. The contract, drafted by Fisk's most pitiless associates, was a masterpiece of oppressive leverage. The 70% for 36 months was just the headline. The definition of gross earnings was broad enough to include endorsement residuals, licensing fees, and even gifted assets over a certain value. The prior, unlicensed engagement clause was intentionally vague, a legally sound black box only Alex understood. Marissa signed. The desperation in her digital signature was palpable. She'd called Holden one last time, her famous voice stripped of its glamour, raspy with confusion. "I don't understand the prior engagement clause." "What debt?" Holden's reply had been toneless. "The clause stands as written, Ms. Vance. The service provider's assessment of historical value is not subject to debate. Do you accept the terms?" She'd accepted. The math was brutal, but her own math was worse. 70% of something was infinitely more than 100% of nothing. 3 days later, a nondescript courier delivered a plain black box to her lockdown apartment. Inside, nestled in gray foam, were two objects. The first was a smartphone. It was sleek, factory-sealed, but utterly generic. When powered on, it displayed a single icon, a black circle. Clicking it opened a video calling app with one preloaded, untraceable contact, BLK. The phone had no browser, no app store, no ability to make other calls. It was a dedicated bat line to her jailer. The second object made her breath catch. A metal card, the gold-engraved Kingmaker of legend. The card itself was a deep, matte black, like a hole in reality. Across its center, in stark, unadorned platinum, was the word Kingmaker. On the back, laser-etched in a microscopic font, was not a number, but an email address, K7N@Seguinte VC. A series of random letters and numbers. A ghost address on the dark web. There was no instruction manual. The tools were the message. The locked phone was her leash. The black card was her marker in his ledger. The email was for data, for scripts, for the raw materials of her reinvention, all to be vetted and approved by the silent entity on the other end of the BLK line. She picked up the Kingmaker card. It was cold, heavy. It felt less like a business card and more like a dog tag for a war she hadn't known she'd enlisted in. The privacy clauses in the contract had been explicit. Any disclosure of the engagement, its terms, or the identity of Mr. Black would result in immediate termination, full forfeiture of any future support, and the triggering of devastating financial penalties. Julian's slip had indeed tightened the noose. Hers was a choke chain. She powered on the phone. The screen glowed with a soft, neutral light. She stared at the black circle icon. Somewhere in the world, in a room with no view, a matching phone would blink with an incoming request. He wouldn't cheat her out of money, she reasoned. A man who built empires had no need to pilfer from a single vault. But as she ran her thumb over the etched word Kingmaker X, a colder truth settled in her stomach. He wasn't interested in her money. He was interested in her obedience. He was interested in proof that the ghost who had once deemed him unfit could be remade into a profitable, compliant instrument of his will. The 70% wasn't a robbery. The robbery had already happened years ago when she took his faith and gave him nothing in return. This was the repayment plan with compound interest. Across the world, in a rented room overlooking a fjord, Alex's matching device gave a single, soft pulse. On its screen, a notification appeared, device paired. Contract active. Asset. Vance status online. He didn't answer the call. Let the silence be her first lesson. Let her sit in the quiet of her luxury prison, staring at the tools of her own costly salvation. The tour would continue. The ghost of Mr. Black was now operational, and the first subject of his experiment was now on the clock, paying a 70% tithe for the privilege of being broken down and reassembled by the man she'd once thrown away. The first video call connected. Marissa Vance, in her tastefully understated living room, faced her tablet screen. What looked back at her was not a man, but a void. A smooth, matte black mask, featureless save for two slight depressions where eyes might be, covered the upper half of his face. The lower half was obscured by a high collar. The effect was inhuman, like a mannequin carved from shadow. State your primary professional objective. The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old. It was a calm, clipped androgynous tone, filtered of all identity. It was the voice of the contract itself. Marissa, prepared for a negotiation, a discussion, was thrown. I want to be taken seriously again. I want lead roles in prestige projects. I want the narrative to change. Vague, inactionable. The masked face didn't move. Your objective is to secure the lead role in the limited series adaptation of The Glass Cliff, currently in development at Ethelstream. It is a psychological thriller about a politician's wife unraveling a conspiracy. The role requires controlled vulnerability and latent steel. It is your archetype upgraded. This is your target. She blinked, stunned. She'd heard whispers about the project, a hot property locked in a bidding war. How did you? Irrelevant. Your current image is fading beauty, is a liability. Phase 1, austerity. You will be photographed twice in the next week. Once leaving a downtown psychiatric clinic specializing in trauma therapy. Once at the airport, dressed in business attire, carrying a well-worn copy of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. No statement will be given. The narrative will be depth, not drama. You will cancel all other press engagements. A psychiatric clinic? That makes me look unstable. It makes you look complex. It introduces a note of struggle that precedes the strength. The narrative must have a before to make the after credible. You will go. You will sit in the waiting room for 50 minutes. You will leave. You will be seen. The cold, procedural delivery brooked no argument. This wasn't a collaborator. It was a programmer issuing code. Phase 2, the voice continued, skill demonstration. You will record a 3-minute monologue from the glass cliff. You will perform it not to the camera, but to a mirror, as if practicing. The recording will be leaked from a supposed acting coach's compromised cloud storage. The performance will be raw, unpolished, focused on interiority, not presentation. It will be the opposite of your early, broad work. It will be evidence of the work in progress the clinic photos suggest. Marissa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He wasn't just managing her career. He was surgically dissecting and reassembling her public soul. He knew the exact levers to pull. The vulnerability she feared showing, the intellectual credibility she secretly craved. The fee, she started, the 70%, a concrete block in her stomach. The fee is the engine. Your focus is the fuel. Send the clinic photo confirmations to the provided email by 1800 hours tomorrow. The call is terminated. The screen went black. Marissa sat in the sudden silence, the echo of the androgynous voice hanging in the air. The masked figure hadn't been Mr. Black. It had been a function, a cold, terrifyingly efficient function that knew her better than she knew herself. He had watched her rise, spectated her fall, and had cataloged every flaw. Now he was the mechanic, and she was the vehicle bought and paid for, about to be taken apart and rebuilt according to a blueprint she hadn't even seen. There was no anger, no resentment left, just a profound, humbling fear and a sliver of something else. The first spark of hope she'd felt in years. The Kingmaker had crowned others. For her, he was building a guillotine for her old self and a platform for a new one. All she had to do was lie down on the block and follow his cold, clipped instructions to the letter. A quick break for a station ID. Forget brute force. The most satisfying takedowns are silent, surgical, and strategically perfect. If you appreciate revenge served cold by a mastermind, you belong here. Subscribe to Novella Station. Chapter 14. The Vindication. The ground, patiently built over 18 months of invisible labor, finally fissured. The catalyst was a script titled The Silent Bell, a historical drama about a deaf school in the 19th century. Mr. Black's directive was, for once, not a suggestion, but a command. You will audition for the role of Headmistress Althea Greaves. The part requires sign language fluency, which you will attain to a conversational level within 8 weeks. You will embody not kindness, but ruthless compassion. This is not a supporting role. It is the foundation upon which the film is built. Your previous work has earned you the right to read for it. This work will earn you the part. The gauntlet was thrown. Marissa immersed herself in the silent world, her hands learning a new language of discipline, her famous face stripped of its performative charm, replacing it with the stern, watchful gravitas of a woman fighting a silent war. She won the role. The announcement was met not with fanfare for her return, but with respectful curiosity from the industry. Interesting choice, the trades wrote. A bold swing for Vance. The filming was an aesthetic experience. There were no vanity close-ups. Her performance was built in the set of her shoulders, the expressiveness of her hands, the unwavering resolve in her eyes. The director, a notoriously exacting auteur, was famously quoted on set, "I hired a movie star. I am getting a monument." When The Silent Bell premiered at a fall festival, it was not Marissa Vance who took the stage for the curtain call, but Headmistress Greaves, a figure of such austere, monumental power that the applause that followed was initially hushed, then thunderous. The reviews were a coronation. They spoke of a career-defining performance, a revelation, the complete shedding of skin to reveal the true artist beneath. The award season buzz began as a hum and built into a roar. When the Oscar nominations were announced, Marissa Vance was listed for Best Supporting Actress. The narrative was perfect, not a comeback, but an arrival. The washed-up star was dead, replaced by a respected, formidable character actress who had earned her place. On the night of the ceremony, sitting in a sea of chiffon and tuxedos, Marissa felt the weight of the obsidian card in her clutch. The faceless mask, the modulated voice, the 18 months of grueling, meticulous deconstruction, it had all led to this moment. The presenter opened the envelope, and the Oscar goes to Marissa Vance, The Silent Bell. The world erupted in sound. The standing ovation was for the performance, for the story, for the stunning redemption arc. As she floated to the stage, the gold statue heavy and cold in her hands, she looked out at the blinding lights and the sea of famous faces. Her acceptance speech was gracious, thanking the director, her fellow cast, the deaf community consultants. It was perfect, and as she finished, holding the Oscar aloft, a single, traitorous thought cut through the triumph. He knew. He knew this was here all along. Back in her private suite hours later, the Oscar on the table beside a bottle of untouched champagne, the sterile phone chimed. Incoming, BLK. She answered. The blank mask filled the screen. Congratulations are irrelevant. The objective has been achieved, the toneless voice stated. Your market value has now recalibrated. The 36-month period of the primary contract commences as of your next signed deal. The 70% levy is now active on all gross earnings. Your anxiety is not a handicap. It is potent vulnerability. It is the engine of the performance. You will learn to start on command. A preliminary analysis of upcoming offers will be sent to your conduit within 48 hours. Your next project will be a lead role in a psychological thriller for Neon Pictures. The script is superior. You will accept. The call ended. The silence that followed was absolute. She stared at the dark screen, the modulated words hanging in the air. And then, unbidden, a different voice washed over her. Young, earnest, intense. Your insecurity isn't a flaw, Marissa. It's your potent vulnerability. A memory, sharp and painful. Herself, trembling before an audition for her first major film, ready to bolt. Him, Alex, holding her shoulders, his eyes not selling a line but stating a fact. He hadn't soothed her. He'd reframed her panic, giving it a purpose, a name. Potent vulnerability. The floodgates opened. She remembered his relentless drilling of her monologues, not for emotion, but for strategy. They want to see you feel? Fine, but you control what the feeling does. She remembered his blueprints for navigating Hollywood parties. You're not networking. You're gathering intelligence on what they're afraid of. And she remembered, with a gut punch of shame, dismissing it all. As her star rose, his constant, quiet analysis began to feel small, pedestrian. Her new manager called it overthinking. Her glossy friends laughed at her philosopher boyfriend. The very clarity he gave her became a cage in her mind, a reminder of a scrappier, needier past she was outgrowing. Her own roaring insecurities, fed by new voices telling her she was instinctive, a natural, transformed his meticulous coaching into an embarrassment. She didn't just leave him. She erased his methodology, convinced her success was her own innate magic, not their built architecture. The methods of Mr. Black, the somatic overrides for anxiety, the cold dissection of character motive over emotion, the rebuilding from tiny, credible parts upward, they weren't just similar. They were the evolved, hardened, professionalized version of the very playbook she had once thrown in the trash. The prior, unlicensed engagement wasn't a business deal. It was the years of his unwavering belief, his strategic mind, his very soul, poured into her for free. She had taken the blueprint, claimed the castle as her own creation, and burned the architect. Now, the architect was back, charging not for the new plans, but for the original stolen foundation. With a 70% royalty, a silent, shuddering breath escaped her. She looked at the Oscar. It was his. Every line of her performance in The Silent Bell, the disciplined hands, the unsentimental resolve, was a footnote in his compendium. He hadn't just won her an award. He had proven, conclusively, that his system worked. She was his living, breathing, Oscar-winning QED. The urge to scream his name, to beg, to unravel this sick joke, was a physical pressure in her chest. But her eyes flicked to the clause on the contract, seared into her memory. Any disclosure of his identity or the terms would trigger penalties so vast, so creatively ruinous, they would not just reclaim the Oscars' earnings, but would dismantle her name, her reputation, and her future with the cold efficiency of a surgical strike. He wouldn't just take the money. He would salt the earth. She was the crowning achievement of the Kingmaker, and she was his perfect, silent prisoner. The debt was paid in the only currency he now valued, her absolute, profitable, and silent compliance. Alex terminated the call, the blank mask dissolving from his screen. In the silent, rented room overlooking the Taipei night, he allowed himself a single, slow exhalation. It was not a sigh of satisfaction, but of a hypothesis confirmed. He had intentionally seeded the phrase. His final message had been meticulously crafted. Your anxiety is not a handicap. It is potent vulnerability. It is the engine of the performance. You will learn to start it on command. The words were a key, thrown onto the marble floor of her triumph. He knew the sound they would make in the echo chamber of her memory. He had watched, through the digital pinhole of her progress, as the clues piled up, her moments of hesitation during vocal drills, the flicker of confused recognition in her eyes during a video check-in when he dissected a character's motive with a familiar, ruthless logic. He hadn't just wanted her to succeed. He had needed her to understand who was architecting that success. Anonymity was a shield, but for this particular ghost, recognition was the final, exquisite piece of the contract. The 70% was the financial penalty. The dawning horror of her own realization that she was paying a king's ransom to the man whose kingdom she'd thought she'd left in ruins was the emotional levy. He wanted her to know. He wanted her to lie awake in her perfect, Oscar-winning bed and stare at the ceiling, tracing the invisible architecture of her comeback back to its source, to him, to the unlicensed engagement, to the faith she'd treated as a free sample. Let her wrestle with the irony. Let it sour every compliment, taint every accolade. Her glory would forever be his receipt. It wasn't cruelty. It was accountability. The ledger, in his mind, had to be felt by both parties to be truly balanced. She had taken his intangible capital, his belief, his strategy, and converted it into her tangible stardom. Now, he was converting her tangible stardom back into his control and forcing her to bear witness to the transaction. The Kingmaker had not just rebuilt a client. He had erected a monument to a very specific, personal truth that Alex Maxim's value was not a variable to be discarded. It was a constant, and its price had just been recalibrated at a much, much higher rate. He closed the dedicated laptop. The ghost of Mr. Black receded. The chapter on Marissa Vance was entering its long, profitable maintenance phase. The lesson was delivered. The debt was now actively being repaid, with interest, in the currency of her own brilliant, haunted awareness. Alex powered down the device, the screen going dark. The ghost was exorcised. Not banished, but caged. Marissa would now live in the gilded prison of her own success, the bars made of her shame and the lock forged from her guilt. Every award, every flashbulb, every line of praise would ring hollow, a chilling reminder of the architect in the shadows. She had her crown, and he held the deed to the kingdom it represented. The past was finally settled, not with a shout, but with the silent, crushing weight of a truth she could never speak. A ghost for a ghost. A fitting end. Short promo time. Novella Station don't do instant love. We do slow, fragile bridges built across chasms of past mistakes. If you're here for the meticulous repair of a broken connection, subscribe for more. Chapter 15. The Inherited Ledger. Claire's corner office at Stratagem was a testament to a victory that had long ago turned to ash in her mouth. The skyline view was a taunt. Every award felt like a plaque mounted on a tomb, the tomb of the partnership that had birthed it all. The framed napkin, Alex's handwriting forever etched under glass, was not a trophy. It was her hair shirt. She hadn't hired Lily Maxim as a calculation. It was a faint, desperate gesture of penance toward a ghost. When Lily entered, professional and poised in her emerald dress, Claire's usual CEO demeanor fractured. "Lily, welcome," Claire said, her voice strangely thin. She didn't gesture to the napkin. She stared at it, as if it were an accuser. "I knew your brother. Alex. He mentioned you worked together," Lily said carefully, following Alex's script, polite, opaque. A bitter, quiet laugh escaped Claire. work together. She finally turned from the napkin, her eyes meeting Lily's, and in them was a raw, unvarnished shame Lily had never expected. That's a generous way to put it. I built this company on a blueprint he drew on that napkin. The name, stratagem, the equity model, the core client thesis, it all came from him during late nights at a diner when we had nothing but big dreams. She paused, the confession hanging in the air between them, too heavy for the sleek office. I executed it. I built it. But the soul of it, the genius of it, was his. And when it was time to build, I told him he was only good for the blueprint, that he couldn't pour the concrete. Her gaze dropped to the sleek desk. This chair I'm sitting in, this view, it feels borrowed. Every single day. I didn't steal it, not in the legal sense. But in every other way that matters, I took the one perfect thing he gave the world and put only my name on it. Lily stood utterly still, overwhelmed. This wasn't the cold, calculating woman Alex had warned her about. This was a woman unspooling a decade of guilt in a torrent, confessing to a priest she'd just met. He warned me about you, Lily said softly, the words slipping out. He said to keep my distance. That business didn't allow personal emotions. Claire nodded, a tear tracing a clean path through her perfect makeup. He's right. It doesn't. And that's the excuse I used. But it was just pride. Ugly, terrified pride. I was so afraid of being in his shadow that I tried to erase him from the picture entirely. She looked back at Lily, her expression pleading for something, forgiveness, understanding, a connection to the ghost. He must hate me. Lily, reeling, could only grasp for the truth as she knew it. He doesn't talk about you, or the past. He just moves forward. It was the most devastating thing she could have said. Claire absorbed it, the hope in her eyes dimming. Of course he didn't talk about her. She was a discarded variable, a solved problem. Please, Claire said, her voice regaining a fragment of its steady strength, though it now sounded like a plea. Let me open doors for you here. Not because of guilt, though God knows that's part of it, but because you're brilliant in your own right. And maybe helping you is one small, decent thing I can do with this borrowed chair. Lily nodded, mute. The script Alex had given her was useless here. She was in uncharted territory, standing in the heart of her brother's greatest failure, and finding it wasn't a monument to his defeat, but a gilded cage of someone else's regret. The warning hadn't been about Claire's cruelty. It had been about her crushing, complicated humanity. Lily drove home for the weekend, the sleek lines of the city giving way to familiar, leafy roads. The triumphant feeling of the new job had curdled into something sour and confused. Claire's raw confession played on a loop in her mind, clashing violently with Alex's cold warning. That night, after her mother had gone to bed, she found her father in his study, methodically cleaning his old service pistol, a ritual of quiet focus. She leaned in the doorway. Dad! He didn't look up, his hands moving with practiced, gentle precision. The CEO, Claire, the one who worked with Alex. She told me something. He set down the cleaning rod, giving her his full attention. Lily spilled it out, the framed napkin, the confession of borrowed genius, the raw guilt, the plea for penance. Her father listened, his face weathered and still, giving nothing away. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, looking past her at some distant memory. Undisciplined youth. He said finally, the words crisp. That's what that is. A brilliant mind, but no fortitude to see it through. A sharp sword, but no arm to swing it. Your brother had the vision, but not the will to build the wall around it. She had the will, but stole the vision to have something to build. He picked up the pistol, slotting a part back into place with a soft click. A failure of character on both sides, in different directions. He looked at her, his eyes the same clear gray as Alex's, but where Alex's were a frozen lake, her father's were seasoned granite. It's good she realizes it now. Shows the discipline found her later. But the debt isn't to you, Lily, and it's not for you to collect or to forgive. He held her gaze, imparting an order as clear as any he'd given in uniform. Your job is your job. Do it well. Her guilt is her burden to carry. The one wronged is your brother. The next time he calls, you tell him what she said. Clear and straight, No editorial. Then you drop it. The decision on what to do with that information, whether to let her stew, accept an apology, or burn her castle down, is his, not yours. You are not the judge in this court. You're just the messenger. Understood. Lily let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The confusing weight lifted, replaced by a clear, simple duty. Understood. Good. He gave a single, firm nod. Now, help your mother with the dishes. And don't bring office wars into her kitchen. She's got enough on her mind. The simplicity of it was an anchor. The moral calculus wasn't hers to solve. She was just the sister, the daughter, the new archivist. The relief was immediate. She would do her job. She would wait for Alex's call, and she would deliver the message, verbatim, from one battlefield to another. The call came not to her regular phone, but as an email to the old high school address she'd given him. The subject line was just the time, 21 o'clock EST. At exactly 9 p.m., her laptop chimed with a secure video request from an encrypted server. She accepted. Alex's face filled the screen, backdropped by a neutral, unidentifiable wall. He looked the same, that same calibrated calm. But there was a new layer of stillness, as if he'd been weathered by a climate she couldn't see. Lily, you're well. I'm good. The job is interesting. A single, slight nod. Good. And the environment. This was her opening. The order from her father was clear in her mind. Clear and straight. No editorial. The environment is professional. The CEO, Claire, pulled me into her office. She kept her voice flat, reporting facts. She has the original napkin you drew the stratagem model on framed behind her desk. She told me the company was built on your genius, that the chair she sits in feels borrowed. She said she was wrong. That was pride, that she lives with the guilt every day. She offered to mentor me, personally, as penance. She stopped, delivering the final piece of intelligence as she'd observed it. She wasn't calculating, Alex. She was confessing. On the screen, Alex's expression did not change. No flicker of anger, satisfaction, or surprise. His eyes just seemed to focus on a point somewhere beyond the camera, as if processing a new data set. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds. I see, he said finally, the words devoid of any discernible emotion. Thank you for the report. It's noted. That was it. No judgment. No next steps. Just noted. Is that all? Lily asked, unable to hide her confusion. What should I do? You should excel at your job, he replied, his tone shifting back to the familiar, instructive one. User offered mentorship if it provides a tangible skill. Learn the architecture of her empire from the inside. It's a unique educational opportunity. Her emotional state is a variable. Is not your variable to manage. Maintain professional opacity. He was treating Claire's gut-wrenching confession as a resource, a situational factor. Lily felt a chill. She wants forgiveness, Alex. Forgiveness is an emotional transaction with no equity, he stated, as if explaining basic arithmetic. It doesn't rebuild a destroyed blueprint. It doesn't unwrite the past. What she wants is absolution for her own discomfort. My role in her story concluded years ago. Her continuing chapter is not my concern. He studied her face through the screen, perhaps seeing her dismay. His voice softened, just a fraction. You did exactly right, Lily. You delivered the data. That's all I needed. Now detach. Her guilt is her fortress. Let her live in it. You have your own path to build. The call ended, his face winking off the screen, leaving her in the quiet of her childhood bedroom. She had been the messenger, and she had delivered the message to a wall of pure, impenetrable logic. Her father was right. The decision was Alex's, and his decision was to simply close the file. Claire's confession hadn't been met with vengeance or grace. It had been met with the sound of a ledger being closed and shelved in a vast, cold archive. The Kingmaker had assessed the plea from his past and found it contained no strategic value. The most painful punishment, Lily realized, wasn't his hatred. It was his utter, absolute indifference. A week after Lily's report, a thick, legal envelope from Fisk, Holden and Green arrived at her parents' house, addressed formally to the Maxim Family Trust. Her father, suspicious, opened it with his letter knife. The documents inside were dense, but the cover letter from Arthur Fisk was stark in its clarity. It stated that Claire Stratagem, CEO of Stratagem LLC, had executed an irrevocable transfer of 30% of her founding equity in the company into a newly established trust, the sole beneficiaries of which were Alexander, Clara, Robert, and Lily Maxim. The grantor stipulates this is not a gift, but a restitution of value, Fisk's letter read. It is a recognition of foundational intellectual property contribution. The grantor has further stipulated that she seeks no communication, no acknowledgement, and no forbearance from the beneficiaries. This is an act of rebalancing conducted unilaterally. Lily's mother clutched the counter, her face pale. 30% of that company? Alex, what did he do? Robert Maxim read the financial summaries attached. The numbers were staggering. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was the transfer of a genuine fortune, a seismic shift in ownership of the empire Claire had built. He didn't do anything, Clara, Robert said, his voice a low rumble. This is what she did. She's court-martialing herself, passing sentence and executing it in one move. He looked at Lily. You said she was confessing. This isn't a confession. This is a surrender. Lily felt the world tilt. Claire hadn't just spoken words of guilt. She had literally handed over the keys to a third of her kingdom. Not to Alex, but to his family. To his mother who clipped coupons, to his father with his proud, stiff spine, to his sister just starting out. It was atonement engineered to bypass Alex's icy logic entirely, speaking directly to the people whose lives his stolen idea was meant to have supported. Alex's call came an hour later, his voice on the secure line as calm as ever, but with a new, subtle undercurrent. The focused intensity of a strategist whose opponent has made a completely unexpected move. The trust documents, he said, no greeting. You've seen them. Yes. Dad's processing. Mom is in shock. What does this mean? It means Claire understands leverage better than I credited her for, Alex said, a hint of cold admiration in his tone. She couldn't reach me, so she reached around me. By granting equity to the family trust, she creates a permanent financial tether. She can't give 50%. Her hands are tied by other investors, venture capital terms. 30% is the maximum she could unilaterally move. It's the most meaningful gesture possible within her constraints. Is it a trick? No, Alex said after a considering pause. The terms are clean. Fisk wouldn't be involved otherwise. It's not a trick. It's a tactical capitulation. She is voluntarily dissolving her sole ownership of the narrative. She's making the borrowed share legally manifest. It's the action her words implied. What do we do? Lily asked, feeling utterly out of her depth. You do nothing. The trust is managed by Fisk's firm. The distributions will be automatic. It will provide for mom and dad in a way that was always the point. For the first time, she heard a flicker of something, not emotion, but a recognition of a strategic objective long unfulfilled. Her action acknowledges the original sin, that the idea was meant to build security for a family, not just a company for a CEO. She is belatedly executing the clause of the unwritten contract. He fell silent for a moment. She doesn't want forgiveness. She wants the ledger to reflect the truth. This does that. It's efficient. The call ended. Lily looked at the documents spread across the kitchen table. Her father was right. This wasn't about words. It was a surrender. Claire had looked at the fortress of her own success, seen the crack in its foundation that was Alex's stolen genius, and had chosen to dismantle a full third of its walls, handing the stones to the very people she'd walled out. Alex might see it as efficient. Lily saw it as devastating. And for the first time, she understood the true magnitude of her brother's ghostly power. He didn't have to lift a finger for vengeance. His very existence, his uncompromising success elsewhere, had compelled the queen to dethrone herself. The Kingmaker's victory was so complete, his enemy had begun dismantling her own kingdom in tribute. 2 weeks after the equity transfer settled, an email arrived in Claire's long-dormant personal inbox, the one she'd used at Princeton. The sender was an anonymous string of characters. The subject line was blank. There was no greeting, No signature, just a single, massive PDF attachment. She opened it. It was a document titled Stratagem LLC, 24-month strategic expansion and institutional fortification plan. Her breath caught. It was a blueprint, not a simple memo, but a full-scale architectural schematic for her company's future. It analyzed emerging market vulnerabilities, outlined a phased diversification into adjacent consultancy verticals, proposed a talent retention model that would lock in key analysts, and even included a detailed risk assessment for potential economic downturns. It was breathtaking in its scope, incisive in its critique, and brilliant in its solutions. It was written in the same clear, uncompromising logic she remembered from the diner napkin, but evolved, hardened by a decade of brutal experience. This was his language. This was Alex. At the very end, after the financial projections and operational flowcharts, was a single, standalone line. A stabilized, growing entity provides greater long-term security for all stakeholders. She read it 3 times. The tears that came weren't of sadness or even of relief. They were of a profound, staggering understanding. He wasn't saying thank you. He wasn't offering forgiveness. He was engaging. By giving her family 30% of Stratagem, she had, intentionally or not, made them stakeholders. She had made the company's success materially matter to the Maxim family. And Alex, the ultimate strategist, the protector of his tribe, had responded in the only way he truly could, by ensuring that asset, which now partially belonged to his mother, father, and sister, was fortified, optimized, and set on a path of robust growth. He was helping her, not for her sake, but for theirs. Yet, in doing so, he was also helping her. He was acknowledging her act, not as an emotional plea, but as a strategic realignment, one he deemed worthy of his intellectual capital. It was a transaction, but one built on a foundation of terrible, shared history and her unilateral act of good faith. She had returned a portion of the stolen crown. In return, the Kingmaker was sending her the plans to build a bigger, stronger, more legitimate kingdom for them both to hold an interest in. It was the coldest, most practical form of reconciliation imaginable. And for Claire, who had lived for years in the hollow echo of her own success, it felt like a lifeline thrown from a ship she thought had sailed forever. He didn't see her as a person to forgive. He saw her as a variable that had finally corrected its own erroneous value. She would execute the plan, not to win him back, but because it was objectively brilliant, and because its success would now ripple into the lives of the family she'd wronged. The guilt didn't vanish, but it was finally, after all these years coupled with purpose. The ledger wasn't closed, but a new, shared column had been opened. And in the stark, numbers-driven language they both understood, that was the closest thing to peace they would ever get. Fisk, Holden, and Green, senior partners, dining room. The private dining room was a sanctuary of dark wood and quiet confidence. Arthur Fisk reviewed a digital ledger on his tablet, not a sheet of paper. Edwin Holden swirled a glass of claret. Lawrence Green stared at his untouched wine. The transfers have settled, Fisk stated, his voice the calm at the eye of the storm. Let us review the geological layers, as you call them, Edwin. From the last quarter alone. He tapped the screen. The Williams Heritage Group disbursement. Mr. Blue's 30% of their profit share. A culinary empire built on tribal recipes. Substantial. Holden nodded. The Duran Group logistics restructuring. Mr. Red's share of the value creation. He didn't just save a company. He sterilized its board and crown and heir. The returns are not just financial, they're dynastic. Fisk continued, scrolling. Horizon Pictures, formerly a sinking nightlife brand. Mr. Gray's 30% of the Velvet Rope profits, plus the return of his personal $2 million stake with premium. He turned a scandal into a streaming asset. And now, Holden cut in, his dry smile returning, the Vance matter. The 70% levy has been triggered with her Oscar win. The first payment from that contract alone is larger than some of our standard corporate retainers for a full year. He's not just taking a cut, Lawrence. He's collecting a historic debt with compound interest. Green finally found his voice, strained. It's obscene. It's a color-coded rake-off operation. Blue, red, gray, white, black. It's a palette of plunder. It's a portfolio, fist-corrected, setting the tablet down with a soft click. Each color represents a different sector, a different type of collapse, and a bespoke solution. Restaurant, logistics, entertainment, celebrity, and now, he glanced at Holden. And now, the unlooked-for dividend, Holden said, savoring the words. Stratagem. Claire Stratagem's unilateral transfer of 30% equity into the Maxim Family Trust. An act of atonement that has, overnight, made our phantom client a major silent partner in the very company that once spurned him. The irony is mathematically beautiful. He doesn't have to lift a finger. His family's trust will now benefit from every move she makes. And given her talent for execution, that is a river of equity for decades. He leaned forward, looking directly at Green. You called him a fantasist, Lawrence. You said the commission model was beneath us. Look at the palette. Blue food, red, steel and shipping, gray and white and black, various shades of storytelling and fame. And now, a passive, monumental stake in corporate strategy itself. He isn't just building kingdoms. He's building an ecosystem, and our firm holds the legal titles to every single one of them. Green's face was a mask of conflicted awe and horror. The abstract success was now a crushing list of concrete, market-dominating victories. It's a monopoly on second acts. It's a monopoly on clarity, Holden countered. He sees the fatal flaw, the missing component, the incomplete foundation, and he provides it. For a price that seems extortionate until you realize he is selling the one thing his clients cannot get anywhere else. Their own potential, fully realized. The price is always worth it. That is his product, and we are his bankers. Silence fell, heavy with the weight of the numbers. The Roth inquiry, Green muttered. A last weak defense. That's the end of it. Playing with that kind of power, it's a different game. Fisk picked up his brandy glass. His response to Roth was the most elegant proof of concept yet. He didn't play. He removed himself from the board. He understood that some games cannot be won, only avoided. The man who can walk away from the most powerful table in the country is not a pawn. He is a sovereign state, and we, gentlemen, have been granted the exclusive banking charter. Holden raised his glass in a slow, silent toast to the empty chair at the table. The chair reserved for the client who never sat in it, the color palette of empires hanging invisibly in the air between them. Green, defeated, finally reached for his own glass. He didn't toast. He just took a long, deep drink, as if swallowing the astonishing, unsettling future whole. Now for promo. The best stories aren't about escaping your curse, but understanding its name. If you're following a prophecy that's finally coming into focus, don't miss a chapter. Subscribe. Chapter 16, The Seer at the Crossroads. The European tour was a silent circuit, an audit of old-world systems. In a shabby, picturesque square in Prague, where mist softened the Gothic spires and the smell of hot wine and damp stone mingled, Alex saw the impossible. Tucked between a vendor selling cheap Soviet-era trinkets and a boarded-up cafe was a stall with a familiar, faded tapestry. And behind it, the same woman. The palm reader from the college street fair a lifetime ago. The same wrinkled hands resting on the cloth. The same eyes, milky at the edges yet piercingly clear at the center. A decade had passed. Empires had risen from his designs. But she looked unchanged, preserved in the amber of her own prophecy. A cold, illogical jolt, sharper than any data point, went through him. Coincidence is a statistical curtain. This is a thread being pulled. He approached. She didn't look up, her fingers tracing the lines on her own palm as if reading an old, familiar map. "You," he said, his voice flat in the damp air. Her eyes lifted. No surprise. The riverbed. You have become very skilled at directing the water. You have even learned to sell it. But you are still stone. The old, familiar chill. Your diagnosis was always vague. Not complete. A fortune cookie for the desperate. She smiled, a thin, knowing crack in her weathered face. It was not vague to you. You knew what it meant then. You know what it means now. You just refused to look at it. She pointed a bent finger and not at his hand, but at his chest. You built empires for others. You gave them the clarity they lacked. But you were looking for your own missing piece in the wrong places. Not in businesses, not in crowns. Her gaze held his, pitiless. You had it. The completion. The mind that matched yours, not in business, but in seeing. The scientist. The one who loved truth more than people. You were her anchor. She called you her control variable. And you let her go. Alex's breath stilled. Elena. The name was a locked door in a mansion of memories. She left, he stated, the old defense rising automatically. The fellowship. She chose her work. She said relationships were an inefficient variable. The old woman's laugh was a dry rustle. And you, the brilliant man who sees the truth in everyone's lies, believe the lie that was easiest for you to hear, the lie that let you be the martyr to your own curse. She leaned forward, her whisper cutting through the mist and distant accordion music. Think. With the others, you were the coach, the strategist. But with her, you were not her teacher. You were her competitor. The damning evidence, buried under years of strategic grief, erupted in his mind with brutal clarity. Elena, frustrated, throwing a textbook on the bed. Alex, stop analyzing my research proposal and just kiss me. I have advisors for this. Him, smiling his cold, knowing smile. Your methodology is flawed on page 3. Fix that, then we can talk about stars. Her, later, her voice uncharacteristically small. Why are you like this with me? With them, you're so human. With me, it's like you're trying to win a debate I'm not even having. He had mistaken her craving for normalcy, for simple, stupid romance, as a lack of seriousness. He thought pushing her academically was the ultimate proof of his love, the only currency he believed was valuable. He had, with clinical precision, edited the boyfriend out of the script and inserted a rival academic. The fellowship was her escape, the seer said, reading the horror dawning on his face. Not from you, but from the version of you that you insisted on being, the one who could only love through utility. She did not leave because you were incomplete. She left because you refused to be complete with her, to be soft, to be quiet, to be something other than the smartest man in the room. You gave her no room to be your equal in heart, only in mind. And a heart cannot live on data alone. Alex felt the ground beneath him, so solid for so long, turn to sand. The greatest failure of his strategic mind was not a business. It was a relationship. He had misdiagnosed the problem entirely. He thought he was the victim of her ambition. He was the architect of his own abandonment. The curse was never that you couldn't keep a woman, the old woman pronounced, her final verdict gentle and absolute. The curse was that you only knew how to love them as projects. And with the one woman who was never a project, who was your true equal, you didn't know how to love at all. You only knew how to compete. And you lost. She sat back, her energy spent. The truth hung in the cold Prague air, more undeniable than any stock ticker or contract clause. Alex placed a large euro note on her ragged tapestry. Not payment for a service, but tribute for an excavation. He didn't look at her as he turned and walked away, the mist clinging to him like the ghost of his own stupidity. He had traveled the world to outrun a prophecy. He had just discovered the prophet was right, and the only salvation he'd ever been offered, he had bored away with his own relentless, lonely brilliance. The tour was over. The only journey that mattered now was an internal one, back through a past he had catastrophically misread. He had taken 3 steps into the mist when her voice, thin yet carrying, stopped him. Wait. He paused but did not turn. It is not too late, she said, the certainty in her voice different now. Not diagnosing a flaw, but stating a fact. The water has not all flowed away. Some is trapped in the stone, waiting. She still waits for you. This time, Alex turned. How could you possibly know that? The old woman's gaze was no longer pitiless. It held a faint, inexplicable pity. Because a mind like hers does not give its anchor away lightly. She let go of the boy who argued with her, not the man who could have been her harbor. She walks her own path, but she glances at the shore she left. You are a variable she has not fully solved. Find her, not to fix her, not to compete, to apologize, to be still, and you'll be complete. She waved a dismissive hand, the audience truly over now. Go. The reading is finished. The path is yours. Alex stood for another moment in the swirling mist, the words she still waits echoing in the hollow space her diagnosis had carved out. It felt less like hope and more like a final, terrifying assignment. One with no blueprint, no contract, and a reward he could no longer even conceptualize: peace. He gave a slow, shallow nod to her, to the truth, to the impossible task ahead, and walked away, not into the tourist-clogged heart of the city, but toward the quieter, darker streets along the river. The tour of empires was over. The search for the only kingdom that had ever truly mattered, and that he had foolishly abandoned, had just begun. Promo time. The legend steps into the light. At Novella Station, we love when the Phantom becomes institution and the game changes forever. Ready for the unveiling? Make sure you're subscribed. Chapter 17. The Control Variable. The frantic search was conducted with a cold, surgical precision that belied the turmoil beneath. Alex was not a lovelorn man seeking a lost flame. He was a strategist recovering a critical, discarded asset. He began with data. He knew she'd taken a Rothschild Fellowship in Switzerland. A few encrypted inquiries through academic channels, leveraging old, residual credibility from his Princeton days, confirmed she had completed it, then accepted a senior research position at the prestigious Kohler Institute for Neuroimmunology in Vienna. She was not just there. She was leading a groundbreaking team studying the brain's inflammatory response to long-term stress. Her published papers were numerous, her reputation formidable. She had done exactly what she said she would. She had changed the world, one peer-reviewed study at a time. He flew to Vienna. He did not call. He knew, with a certainty that felt like the first law of a new physics, that a call would be another transaction, a negotiation. She would hear the consultant in his voice. He had to be a fact, a presence. The Kohler Institute was a sleek, glass and steel monument to human ingenuity. He waited across the street in a small cafe, watching the entrance through the afternoon drizzle. And then he saw her. Elena emerged, not as a memory, but as a fact of the present. Older, of course. Her hair was pulled into a tighter, more efficient bun. She wore a severe, elegant coat against the damp, and carried a leather satchel overflowing with folders. She was speaking intently with a younger colleague, her hands moving in sharp, explanatory gestures. She looked focused, alive, unhaunted. The sight of her, so complete without him, was a more devastating diagnosis than the palm readers. She had not been waiting. She had been building, flourishing. He waited until the colleague parted ways, then crossed the street, falling in a step beside her as she walked toward the tram stop. Your 2019 paper on glial cell activation pathways was brilliant, he said, his voice calm. But your control group for the chronic stress model was undersized. It left your confidence intervals too wide. Elena stopped dead on the damp sidewalk. She did not gasp or startle. She turned her head with the slow, deliberate motion of a scientist observing an unexpected but fascinating anomaly. Her eyes, the same clear, analytical gray, scanned his face, processing the data. Alex. His name was not a greeting. It was an identification, a variable labeled Elena. They stood in the soft Viennese rain, the sounds of the city a distant hum. The confidence intervals were adequate for the hypothesis being tested, she stated, her tone clinical. Expanding the group would have introduced unacceptable logistical delay. The trade-off was calculated and valid. She paused, her head tilting. Why are you here? This is not your field. This is not a business. I came to apologize, he said, the words feeling foreign and blunt on his tongue. For criticizing my methodology? It's been years. The paper is published. The point is moot. No. He took a breath, the hardest strategic maneuver of his life. I came to apologize for making everything a methodology, for being a rival when you wanted a partner, for talking about data when you wanted to talk about stars. I was incomplete. And I made us an unsolvable equation because I was afraid of the simple human answer. Elena studied him, her expression unreadable. The rain beaded on her wool coat. You are using emotional language. It is imprecise. What is your objective? I don't have one, he said, and for the first time, it was the absolute truth. I have no strategy, no contract. I have only a correction of a past, critical error. I treated you as another project to be optimized. It was the greatest failure of my life. A tram clattered to a stop nearby. She glanced at it, then back at him, her brilliant mind clearly running probabilities, assessing motives, analyzing this sudden, confounding input. This is a significant deviation from your established behavioral patterns, she said finally. The probability of a hidden objective remains high. I know, he admitted, I came to see you. The probability of that being your sole objective is statistically low. State your actual parameters. They stood in the softening rain. This was the wall he'd built, a language of parameters and probabilities. He had to dismantle it, brick by brick, with no tools but the truth. Could we talk? Somewhere not a sidewalk. She assessed him, a clock ticking behind her eyes. I have 53 minutes before a departmental review. There's a cafe. Its coffee is acceptable. Follow. They sat at a small, scarred wooden table. The air smelled of ground coffee and damp wool. He didn't know where to begin, so he began with the end. I saw the old woman, the palm reader from a market. Elena's hand, lifting her cup, paused. The one who told you you were not complete. You remember. I remember everything. Data is my profession. She took a sip, watching him over the rim. What did she say this time? She said it wasn't too late, that you might still be waiting. He let out a short, hollow breath. Seeing you just now, I know you're not. You've moved light years ahead. But she made me see what I did. Why you left? I left for the fellowship. The reason was clearly stated. It was the excuse, he said, the words feeling raw. The reason was me. With Claire, I was trying to be a business prodigy. With Marissa, I was playing the unshakable coach. With everyone, I was performing a version of myself I thought they needed. He met her gaze, forcing himself to hold it. But with you, I was just competitive. I was trying to prove I was the smartest person in your orbit. When you talked about your work, I critiqued it to show I understood. When you wanted to look at stars, I talked about celestial mechanics. You asked me, more than once, to stop, to just be with you. He remembered the exact flash of hurt in her eyes, quickly buried under a layer of clinical disappointment. You laughed, she said quietly, the memory clearly as sharp for her. You said, where's the fun in that? I was an idiot, a terrified, young idiot who thought love was about being impressive. I didn't know how to be your partner. I only knew how to be your rival, and I convinced myself that was a form of respect. He looked down at his untouched coffee. The old woman said my curse was loving women as projects. She was right. But you were the only one who wasn't a project. You were the finished article, and that terrified me more than anything. So I tried to turn you into one, so I'd have a role to play. The cafe hummed around them. Elena was silent for a long time, processing this new data stream. Your hypothesis has merit, she said finally, her voice still cool, but the clinical edge had softened a fraction. Your behavior was consistent with a deep-seated insecurity manifesting as intellectual dominance. It was inefficient and emotionally costly. I know. I'm not asking for anything, Elena. I have no right. I just needed you to know that I see it now. That I'm sorry. That if not for that old woman shaking me awake, I would probably have died alone in a very expensive room, surrounded by blueprints for other people's lives, never understanding why mine was empty. The word sorry hung in the air between them. It was not a word in their old lexicon. She finished her coffee, checked her watch, a precise, elegant gesture. My review is in 18 minutes. This conversation is incomplete. The dataset is insufficient for a conclusion. She stood, gathering her coat. He remained seated, the verdict delivered. I am in Vienna for the foreseeable future, she stated, not looking at him. My work is here. The cafe's coffee is acceptable. I frequent it on Tuesdays and Thursdays after 4 p.m., pending lab delays. She didn't say goodbye. She simply turned and walked out into the rain, leaving him with the debris of his confession and a set of parameters: Tuesdays and Thursdays. After 4 p.m., pending lab delays. It was not forgiveness. It was not an opening. It was a schedule, a possibility for further observation. For Alex, the man who dealt in certainties and contracts, it was the most terrifying and generous thing he had ever been given, a chance to be a recurring and proven variable in her world. He had confessed the fatal flaw in his old code. She had not deleted him. She had left the file open. The frantic search was over. The infinitely more delicate, terrifying work of simply showing up had begun. Alex Maxim approached the problem of human connection with the same methodological rigor he applied to a failing supply chain or a crumbling public image. It was a system, and he had a critical flaw in his code. His first move was data acquisition. He did not call Elena. He adhered strictly to the parameters: Tuesdays and Thursdays after 4 p.m. at the cafe. His second move was independent study. He immersed himself in the primary texts of a world he never understood. He analyzed romantic comedies not for plot, but for behavioral patterns, the timing of a vulnerable admission, the function of a gesture over a grand proclamation. He read novels dissecting relationships, underlining passages about compromise, silent support, and the arithmetic of shared silence. He became a ghost in Vienna's romantic geography, sitting alone in cozy wine bars tucked away in cobblestone alleys, observing how couples leaned into each other's space, how they shared a dessert with 2 forks without discussing the macroeconomics of sugar. He was learning the grammar of a language he'd only ever spoken in binary. At the cafe, their meetings were, at first, starkly informational. He would ask a question born of his research. Is the cultural emphasis on grand gestures statistically correlated with relationship longevity, or is it a selection bias in popular narrative? Elena would consider it, sometimes pulling up studies on her phone. The data is conflicted. Low probability, high-effort gestures can trigger dopamine surges, but sustainability relies on high-frequency, low-effort positive interactions. The gesture is an outlier. The daily pattern is the data set. And he would file that away, focus on the daily pattern, not the performance. He began to implement. He did not buy her flowers. He noticed the single orchid in her lab was wilting and, on a Thursday, presented her with a precise, hardy succulent known for low maintenance and air purification, citing a study on its benefits for indoor air quality in workspaces. A gesture, but a useful one, a hybrid of his old utility and his new intent. She accepted it with a raised eyebrow, but it did not disappear. It sat on her desk, a small green defiance against sterile steel. The frequency of their meetings increased organically, driven not by schedule, but by a mutual, unspoken calibration. A Tuesday meeting would run long, segueing into a walk along the Danube Canal. A Thursday would be interrupted by her crisis with a centrifuge, and he would wait, not offering to fix it, but simply being a presence that did not demand her to be anything other than a frustrated scientist. After 3 months, they were meeting almost daily. The conversations evolved. Less interview, more dialogue. He spoke of Lily at Stratagem, of the surreal equity transfer from Claire, presenting it as a curious case study, watching Elena's mind light up at the psychological variables. She spoke of the political infighting at the Institute, the frustration of grant committees, and he listened, not to solve, but to understand her battlefield. One evening, as they walked through the misty Volksgarten, she stopped by a bench. "Your methodology has changed," she stated, looking at the fog-shrouded rose bushes. "Your inquiry is less competitive, more observational. You're gathering data on me, not on a rival. It's the only data set that matters," he said, the words simple. No flourish, just a reported fact. She turned to him, her analytical gaze softened by the dim, diffused light. "This is your project now, isn't it? This, us, or the potential of an US. You are reverse engineering intimacy." "Yes," he admitted, no point in subterfuge. "It's the most important project I've ever undertaken, and I have no blueprint. I'm writing it in real time, and the primary source material is you." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, the rarest of data points. Your error rate has decreased significantly. She sat on the bench. He sat beside her, not too close. The silence was not empty. It was a shared sample space. He was learning, not how to be a kingmaker for a queen, but how to be a fellow researcher in the unpredictable, unquantifiable experiment of belonging. And for the first time, the goal was not a successful outcome, but the integrity of the process itself. One last promo. Because every great saga needs an ending where the ledger is balanced, the ghosts are at peace, and the kingmaker finally finds his kingdom. If you crave complete, satisfying journeys, subscribe for our next original story. Chapter 18, The Re-Education. The rain painted the cafe window in slow, gray streaks. They had graduated from their original table to a quieter booth in the back. Alex pushed the shared plate of Zahar torta slightly toward Elena, a silent offer of the last bite, a small gesture he'd learned meant more than words. You said the old woman told you I might be waiting, Elena said, not taking the cake, but her voice softer than its usual clinical clip. Alex nodded. It was the only thing she said that didn't feel like a verdict. Elena looked at the rain, a faint smile touching her lips. I saw her too, in Madrid, a year after I left. It was so ridiculous, I almost walked away. But I had to know. This was new. Alex held his breath, the hum of the cafe fading. She knew who I was talking about before I said your name. She called you the riverbed. Elena turned back to him, her eyes holding a warmth he hadn't seen in a decade. Not the heat of debate, but the steady glow of shared history. She told me a story about stone and rain. That the stone might forget it's meant for water, but the water remembers the path. She said you'd come when you were empty. She reached for her coffee, her hand briefly brushing his. She was right. You looked hollow that day outside the Institute. The simple observation, stripped of jargon, was more devastating than any analysis. He admitted, his own voice rough. I'd built a mansion and was living in the broom closet. Elena's smile widened a fraction. A flawed analogy, but I understand the sentiment. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't wait, Alex. Not in the way you think. I built a life. A good one. But I never quite deleted your number from the experiment. What she said gave me a reason to keep the file open. Just in case. Just in case. 2 words that held a universe of quiet hope. She saw us, Alex said, wonder seeping into his tone. Not just me. Us. Before we even knew there could be an us again. It seems she has a terrible habit of meddling. Elena sighed, but it was a fond sound, and an infuriatingly high accuracy rate. They sat in a silence that was no longer just comfortable, but charged with a fragile, mending connection. The old woman's prophecy was no longer a curse hanging over him, but a strange, shared inheritance. Finally, Elena stirred. My big project here, it wraps up next spring. There will be a lot of paperwork. And then, she shrugged, a surprisingly graceful human gesture. I'll have earned a long look at the stars, without anyone explaining the mechanics to me. It wasn't a schedule. It was an invitation, a vision of a future where she had time and was hinting she might want to spend some of it with him, on her terms. Alex felt a surge of something so foreign it took him a moment to name it. Pure, unstrategic hope. I've been reading, he said, a little sheepishly. Try to learn how to just look at the stars. I'm a slow study, but I'm committed. Now Elena did take the last bite of cake, a genuine laugh, soft and real, escaping her. I know. I've seen you in the archives, reading Jane Austen. It was unexpectedly charming. He hadn't known she'd seen him. The fact that she had, and that she'd found it charming, sent a jolt through him warmer than any business triumph. The rain stopped. A weak, silver light broke through the clouds outside. Walk me back, she asked, standing. Always, he said, and meant it in every possible sense. As they stepped out into the washed, clean air, her hand didn't brush his again. But the space between them felt different. Not a gap to be closed with a grand gesture, but a bridge being built slowly, patiently, one honest conversation, one shared piece of cake, one confessed hope at a time. The re-education wasn't about passing a test anymore. It was about learning a new language together, word by tender word. The decision to bring Elena home wasn't a strategic one. It was an instinct to pull stronger than any business logic. He called his mother first, a simple, unadorned statement. I'm bringing someone home. Her name is Elena. The drive to Connecticut was quiet, but the silence was different from the heavy stillness of his previous departure. This silence was full, like a held breath before a good truth. When he pulled into the familiar driveway with Elena beside him, his mother was already on the porch, her hands twisting in her apron. Her eyes went from Alex to Elena, taking in the quiet, intelligent woman at her son's side, and then back to Alex's face, to the absence of the harsh, lonely lines that had been etched there for years. Clara Maxim didn't say a word. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around Alex, and burst into quiet, shaking tears into his shoulder. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a profound, releasing joy. She was weeping for the boy who had left home chasing ghosts, and for the man who had finally returned with a living, breathing hope beside him. His father gave a firm, approving nod from the doorway, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Doctor, he said to Elena, the title a sign of deep respect. Mr. Maxim, Elena replied, shaking his hand with a steady warmth. Your son has told me much about your service. Lily bounded out next, her eyes wide with gleeful shock. She looked from Elena to Alex, a huge grin spreading across her face. Well, I'll be damned, she crowed, punching Alex lightly in the arm. I had a whole theory going that you were secretly in love with Mr. Fisk at the law firm. You know, all that intensity, the tailored suits. She winked at Elena. Thank every god in the sky, I was wrong. Welcome, Elena. You have no idea what you're getting into, but we're so glad you're here. The easy teasing, the open warmth, the lack of calculation. It was a world away from the transactional relationships that had defined his life. As they moved into the warm, cluttered kitchen, the smell of his mother's pot roast filling the air, Alex felt something settle inside him. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was a quiet click, like the final piece of a complex lock sliding home. He watched Elena listen patiently as his mother fretted over the roast, offering a precise, helpful suggestion about resting time that Clara accepted with grateful surprise. He saw his father engage her in a surprisingly detailed discussion about the stress response mechanisms in field operatives. He saw Lily make Elena laugh with an absurd story about corporate archives. And in the center of it all, he simply was not a kingmaker, not a strategist, not a ghost. Just Alex, a son, a brother, a man who had brought a woman he loved home to his family. The feeling of completeness didn't come from Elena alone. It came from the integration. She was the catalyst, but the reaction was happening within him. For the first time, he wasn't building a fortress or fighting a war. He was sitting at a familiar table, his family whole and buzzing around him, with a woman who saw him not for what he could build for her, but for the man he was slowly, painstakingly learning to be. It wasn't the end of a journey. It was the start of a new, uncharted one. But as he met Elena's eyes across the table, seeing a reflected peace in her gaze, he knew the foundation was finally, unshakably, complete. It had been poured not with concrete and strategy, but with forgiveness, patience, and the quiet, terrifying courage to simply come home. The decision to bring Elena home wasn't a strategic one. It was an instinct, a pull stronger than any business logic. He called his mother first, a simple, unadorned statement. I'm bringing someone home. Her name is Elena. The drive to Connecticut was quiet, but the silence was different from the heavy stillness of his previous departure. This silence was full, like a held breath before a good truth. When he pulled into the familiar driveway with Elena beside him, his mother was already on the porch, her hands twisting in her apron. Her eyes went from Alex to Elena, taking in the quiet, intelligent woman at her son's side, and then back to Alex's face, to the absence of the harsh, lonely lines that had been etched there for years. Clara Maxim didn't say a word. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around Alex, and burst into quiet, shaking tears into his shoulder. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a profound, releasing joy. She was weeping for the boy who had left home chasing ghosts, and for the man who had finally returned with a living, breathing hope beside him. His father gave a firm, approving nod from the doorway, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Doctor," he said to Elena, the title a sign of deep respect. "Mr. Maxim," Elena replied, shaking his hand with a steady warmth. "Your son has told me much about your service." Lily bounded out next, her eyes wide with gleeful shock. She looked from Elena to Alex, a huge grin spreading across her face. "Well, I'll be damned," she crowed, punching Alex lightly in the arm. "I had a whole theory going that you were secretly in love with Mr. Fisk at the law firm. You know, all that intensity, the tailored suits." She winked at Elena. "Thank every god in the sky, I was wrong." "Welcome, Elena. You have no idea what you're getting into, but we're so glad you're here." The easy teasing, the open warmth, the lack of calculation. It was a world away from the transactional relationships that had defined his life. As they moved into the warm, cluttered kitchen, the smell of his mother's pot roast filling the air, Alex felt something settle inside him. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was a quiet click, like the final piece of a complex lock sliding home. He watched Elena listen patiently as his mother fretted over the roast, offering a precise, helpful suggestion about resting time that Clara accepted with grateful surprise. He saw his father engage her in a surprisingly detailed discussion about the stress response mechanisms in field operatives. He saw Lily make Elena laugh with an absurd story about corporate archives. And in the center of it all, he simply was not a kingmaker, not a strategist, not a ghost. Just Alex, a son, a brother, a man who had brought a woman he loved home to his family. The feeling of completeness didn't come from Elena alone. It came from the integration. She was the catalyst, but the reaction was happening within him. For the first time, he wasn't building a fortress or fighting a war. He was sitting at a familiar table, his family whole and buzzing around him, with a woman who saw him not for what he could build for her, but for the man he was slowly, painstakingly learning to be. It wasn't the end of a journey. It was the start of a new, uncharted one. But as he met Elena's eyes across the table, seeing a reflected peace in her gaze, he knew the foundation was finally, unshakably complete. It had been poured not with concrete and strategy, but with forgiveness, patience, and the quiet, terrifying courage to simply come home. Epilogue: the ledger balanced. 5 years later, the final transfer was the quietest of them all. No lawyers, no dramatic reveals. An encrypted email sent from an address that no longer mattered to an inbox monitored by a now legendary actress's most trusted financial manager. Subject: account reconciliation. To M. Vance. The prior, unlicensed engagement has been audited. While the service provided a return, the initial emotional capital was, upon review, freely given. Therefore, the 40% penalty levied as historical rebalancing is returned, with standard interest applied for the term. Attached are the transfer details. The 30% professional fee for services rendered stands. The ledger, in my view, is now settled. There was no signature. Marissa stared at the figures, a sum that could buy a small country, and felt no victory. Only the cold, final click of a door she had slammed shut a lifetime ago, being closed, gently and irrevocably. From the other side, a more formal, but equally unexpected, letter arrived at Stratagem headquarters on the simple, elegant stationery of the Maxim Family Trust. Dear Claire, Lily's success is a testament to her own brilliance, but your personal mentorship was the catalyst. For that, you have my gratitude. The 30% equity you transferred remains with the trust. Consider it, if you like, a long overdue finder's fee for the original idea. It is not a chain. It is an anchor for both our families. Should Stratagem ever require strategic consultation, my door is open. Not as a creditor, but as a fellow stakeholder. Sincerely, Alex. Claire held the paper, the words "my gratitude" and "fellow stakeholder" seeming to soften the edges of the titanium frame around the old napkin. The chair finally felt like her own. Senator Andrew Roth did not receive a letter. He received a war. When his operatives finally pierced the layers of obfuscation and laid the identity of the Kingmaker before him, he didn't see a potential asset. He saw a loose end to be controlled. His threat was not a subpoena, but the quiet, ruinous exposure of Alex's network. It was a fatal miscalculation. Alex had spent 4 months methodically mapping the Roth dynasty. Not just their political corruption, but the delicate, illegal financial architectures that propped it up, the shell companies, the unregistered foreign holdings. He did not leak it to the press. He delivered it in neatly packaged, encrypted dossiers to the senator's most ambitious rivals in his own party, to the Attorney General's office, and to the investigative committee of a rival nation whose election Roth had secretly interfered with. The empire did not fall in a single, spectacular scandal. It was dismantled brick by brick over 4 agonizing months in a coordinated, multi-front assault that left no single perpetrator to blame. By the time Roth realized what was happening, the hull of his ship was already full of silent, perfectly placed holes. He resigned to spend more time with his family before the first indictment could be unsealed. The Kingmaker had not just defended his kingdom. He had demonstrated that the same hand that builds can, with greater efficiency, unbuild. 6 months before the wedding, Alex did something that sent a tremor through the rarefied circles that knew the legend. He made it real. Kingmaker LLC was incorporated. Its offices were not in a gleaming tower, but in a renovated, sun-drenched loft in Tribeca. The website was minimalist. A single page, a contact form, a logo of a stylized, open crown. No client list. No testimonials. The silence was the statement. The first official acts were deliveries. Overnight, couriers arrived at the doors of Greg Williams, Dorothy Duran, Richard Wong, Julian Croft, and Marissa Vance. Each contained a new metal card. It was the same heavy, satisfying weight. The same stark Kingmaker engraved on the front. But on the back, where once there was only a color or a ghost address, there were now 3 lines. Alex Maxim, founder and principal. Kingmaker LLC. A name, an address, a public reckoning. The news broke like a silent bomb in the Wall Street Journal and Variety simultaneously. Phantom Fixer emerges from shadows. The man behind the miracles steps into the light. The speculation was frantic, but Alex gave no interviews. The legend, now corporeal, was more potent than ever. Fading stars and drowning CEOs lined up, proposals and desperate pleas flooding the loft's secure server. Alex rejected them all. He was not building an empire. He was curating a legacy. He hired a small, impeccable team of 6, a blend of razor-sharp analysts, a former Special Forces logistician, and a psychologist specializing in high-stakes performance. They were not consultants. They were artisans. Their sole purpose was to translate Alex's foundational diagnoses and strategic blueprints into curated, actionable steps for a select few clients. Alex remained the architect. They were the master builders. He accepted only 2 new clients in that first year. Both were chosen not for their fame, but for the profound, systemic challenge they presented. Quality, not quantity. The Kingmaker was no longer a ghost for hire. He was an institution, and admission was the most exclusive ticket in the world. The wedding invitations were hand-delivered by the same courier service. They went to Greg and his wife Anya, to Dorothy Duran, to Richard Wong, to Julian Croft and his new, serious-minded partner. One went to Claire Stratagem, and, after a moment of profound silence, one went to Marissa Vance. They all came. It was a gathering of royalty from different, once-broken kingdoms, united under the oak tree in Connecticut. The air hummed with a unique electricity, shared history, quiet awe, and the simple, human joy of celebration. And then, just as the ceremony was about to begin, she appeared. The old woman. She wore a simple dress of indigo linen, looking no different than she had in Prague or Madrid. She didn't walk up the driveway. She seemed to simply materialize at the edge of the garden, a smile on her timeless face. A hush fell over the assembled guests, the ones who knew the stories feeling a collective chill of recognition. She walked straight to Alex and Elena, who stood waiting beneath the oak. She took Elena's hand, then Alex's, clasping them together between her own wrinkled palms. "The riverbed is full," she whispered, her voice carrying in the stillness. "The system is complete." She looked at their joined hands, then up at their faces, her eyes twinkling with something that was neither mystic nor clinical, but deeply, profoundly knowing. "You will not need me again, but I will find you, if the path ever grows faint." She released their hands, gave a small, gracious nod to the stunned assembly, and turned, melting back into the dappled light of the garden path as quietly as she'd come. It was the final, perfect, inexplicable blessing. The prophet of their past had come to sanction their future. As Alex turned back to Elena, ready to speak his vows, he knew the final transformation was complete. The Kingmaker was no longer a role, a curse, or a legend. He was simply a man, standing in the light, holding the hand of the woman who had taught him that his greatest power wasn't in building kingdoms, but in finally coming home. And that is how a curse becomes a crown. The Kingmaker's ledger is closed. The ghosts are at peace. The riverbed, at last, is full. Did his journey satisfy? Was the balance of power, forgiveness, and love everything you hoped for? Let us know in the comments. Balance scale, whose redemption arc hit hardest? Crown, which client's transformation was your favorite? Ring, did Alex and Elena's ending feel earned? This is why we craft stories at Novella Station. Not just for the thrilling rise, but for the profound, hard-won peace at the summit. If you crave tales where strategy meets soul and power bows to love, subscribe and turn on notifications. Your next obsession is already in production. Thank you for watching. Now, go build your own kingdom.